The comms crackled to life in the dim, grease-stained cockpit of the Defiant, a ship that wasn't supposed to exist. "You're a dead man, human," the voice hissed, sharp and alien, laced with the guttural clicks of the Zarthani enforcer on the other end. "You think we wouldn't notice a warship slipping through the embargo zone? Your species was warned. You were banned." The words hung heavy, like a noose tightening in the air. No response came. Not yet. The captain's fingers danced across the controls, coaxing the ship's engines into a low, rebellious hum. Outside, the void stretched endless and cold, dotted with the flickering lights of Zarthani patrol drones closing in. They'd found him. Of course they had. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight, and let a slow, bitter smile tug at his lips. Banned, huh? The galaxy's high and mighty council had sat in their shimmering towers a decade ago, decreeing that humanity, too reckless, too defiant, too human, couldn't be trusted with warships. No more battle fleets, no more cannons roaring in the dark. "Strip them down," they'd said. "Leave them with cargo haulers and meek little survey ships. Keep them in line." He remembered the broadcasts, the smug faces of the council's alien overlords as they handed down the edict. He'd been a kid then, watching his father, a shipwright with hands like steel and a heart full of fire, smash a bottle of cheap whiskey against the wall and swear he'd never bow. 10 years. 10 years of watching humanity choke under the embargo, scraping by while the Zarthani and their ilk strutted across the stars, their sleek dreadnoughts casting shadows over human colonies. 10 years of whispered rumors in backwater bars, rumors of rogue shipyards, of men and women who wouldn't kneel. He'd tracked those whispers like a bloodhound, from the asteroid belts of Tau Ceti to the rusted docks of New Haven. And now here he was, aboard the Defiant, a ship born in secret, its hull forged from stolen alloys and human spite. They'd done it anyway. Damn the ban! Damn the council! Damn them all! "Captain!" The shout jolted him back. It was his second in command, her voice raw as she stumbled into the cockpit, her dark hair plastered with sweat. "Drones are locking weapons. 3 minutes tops before they're in range. We've got no shields yet. R&D didn't finish the grid before we had to bolt." Her eyes, wide and fierce, met his. She didn't say it, but he heard it anyway. "We're screwed." He exhaled through his nose, the sound sharp and deliberate. "Then we don't let them get close. Fire up the thrusters. Full burn." She hesitated, just for a heartbeat, and he saw the flicker of doubt in her. The Defiant wasn't ready. Not really. It was a patchwork beast, its guns untested, its hull barely holding against the stress of a hard run. But they'd known that when they stole it from the yard, when they'd gunned the engines and torn out of orbit with Zarthani alarms screaming behind them. No turning back now. "You sure?" she asked, voice low like she was testing him. He didn't blink. "I didn't build this thing to die quiet. Move!" She nodded once, sharp, and bolted back to the engine bay. The deck shuddered as the thrusters roared to life, a deep, guttural howl that rattled his bones. The Defiant surged forward, cutting through the black like a blade through flesh. On the view screen, the drones adjusted course, their red targeting lights pulsing faster. They weren't letting go. He gripped the controls, his knuckles white. He could still hear his father's voice, slurring through that broken night a decade ago. "They think they can chain us, boy. Think they can take the stars from us. But we're humans. We don't bend. We break 'em." The old man had died 2 years later, worked to death in a council-run scrapyard, dismantling the last of humanity's proud fleet. The captain had sworn then, sworn on blood and ash, that he'd see that fire burn again. The Defiant was his answer, his middle finger to the galaxy. But answers came with a price. The comms crackled again. "Last chance, human. the Zarthani snarled. "Surrender or we reduce you to dust." He thumbed the mic, his voice steady as stone. "Come and try." He cut the line, and the silence that followed was louder than the engines. The drones were closing. The fight was coming. And deep down, in the pit of his gut, he knew. This was just the beginning. The Defiant screamed through the void, its engines burning hotter than they were ever meant to. The captain's hand stayed locked on the controls, his jaw tight as the ship bucked beneath him. Every shudder of the hull was a reminder. This beast wasn't polished, wasn't perfect. It was a rebel's dream hammered together in the shadows, and now it was being tested in fire. The viewscreen flared with warnings. The Zarthani drones were gaining, their sleek, needle-like forms cutting through space with a precision humans hadn't matched in a decade. Not since the Council stripped them bare. Not since the ban. "Thrusters at 110%, his second-in-command shouted from the engine bay, her voice crackling over the intercom. "We're pushing redline. Any more and we'll blow a core." Sweat dripped into his eyes, but he didn't wipe it away. He could feel the heat bleeding through the deck, the ship groaning like a wounded animal. He didn't care. They weren't outrunning the drones to survive. They were doing it to prove a point. The galaxy thought humans were finished, neutered by rules and threats. They were wrong. A sharp beep cut through the noise. Target lock. The drones had range now, their weapons hot. "Brace!" he barked, yanking the controls hard to starboard. The Defiant lurched, a clumsy dodge for a ship this size, but it was enough. A streak of plasma scorched past, missing the hull by meters, lighting up the cockpit in a sickly green glow. His stomach twisted, not from fear, but from fury. Those bastards wanted him dead, wanted this ship, his ship, turned to slag. They'd get their chance, but not yet. "Guns online?" he called, voice rough as gravel. A pause, then her reply. "Half charged." Targeting's glitchy. Aim's manual. He cursed under his breath. Manual, of course. The weapons team back at the rogue yard had begged for more time, more resources, but time ran out when the Zarthani raided the system. They'd barely gotten the Defiant spaceborne, its cannons still a mess of jury-rigged circuits and hope. Didn't matter. "Get someone on it," he snapped. "I want a shot." Footsteps pounded behind him as a crewman stumbled in, lanky and pale, his hands trembling as he slid into the gunner's seat. "Never fired one of these," he muttered, voice shaking. The captain didn't look at him. "First time for everything. Line it up." The kid swallowed hard, fingers fumbling over the controls. On the viewscreen, the drones fanned out, 3 of them now, their movements synchronized like a predator pack. They weren't just machines. They were the Council's will made metal, sent to crush what humans dared to dream. The ship jolted again. Another near miss. The captain's mind raced, replaying every scrap of memory from his father's stories. The old man had been a gunner once, back when humanity's fleets ruled the lanes. "Hit 'em where they don't expect," he'd said, voice thick with liquor and pride. "They think we're predictable. Prove 'em wrong." The captain's eyes narrowed. The drones were fast, but they relied on patterns, on logic. Humans didn't. "Hold fire," he said, voice low. The gunner froze, confused. "What?" "Just hold." He jerked the controls again, sending the Defiant into a wild spiral. The crew cursed as they slammed against their harnesses, but he ignored them. The drones adjusted, closing tighter, their targeting systems recalibrating. He waited, counting the seconds, feeling the rhythm of their pursuit. Then, now. "Port side, lead drone, fire!" The cannon roared, a ragged burst of light that tore through the dark. The shot was sloppy, off-center, but it hit. The lead drone erupted in a silent fireball, debris spinning into the void. The other 2 broke formation, caught off guard. A cheer went up from the crew, raw and desperate, but the captain didn't join in. 1 down, 2 to go. And behind those drones he knew was something worse. A Zarthani cruiser lurking just out of sensor range, waiting to finish what its pets started. "Keep moving," he growled, pushing the throttle harder. The engines screamed in protest, but they held. His second-in-command burst back into the cockpit, her face streaked with grime. "We can't sustain this. Hull's cracking." He met her gaze, unflinching. "Then we make it count." She stared at him, then nodded, a flicker of something, respect, maybe, crossing her face before she ran back to her post. The comms lit up again, that same alien voice, colder now. "You think 1 kill changes anything, human? You're a spark in a storm. We'll bury you." The captain didn't answer. He didn't need to. The Defiant was alive, fighting, defying. That was enough, for now. But deep down, he felt it. The storm was coming, and it wouldn't stop with drones. The Defiant tore through the black, a wounded beast leaving a trail of sparks and leaking coolant. The captain's hands ached from gripping the controls, his eyes burning as he tracked the 2 remaining drones on the view screen. They'd regrouped, smarter now, weaving tighter patterns to box him in. The trick with the spiral had bought time, but not much. The ship's hull creaked under the strain, every jolt a reminder that this wasn't a warship fresh off some gleaming assembly line. It was a rogue's gamble, built by hands that refused to quit. And it was starting to show. "Damage report," he barked, voice cutting through the cockpit's din. His second-in-command stumbled back in, her breath ragged, a datapad clutched in her grimy hands. "Port thrusters at 60%. Hull breaches on decks 3 and 4. Sealed for now, but they won't hold under fire. Guns are overheating. We've got maybe 2 shots left before they fry." She looked at him, her gaze hard but fraying at the edges. "We're bleeding out here." He didn't flinch. "Then we bleed loud. Get the crew to reinforce those seals." She hesitated, lips parting like she wanted to argue, but the set of his jaw stopped her. She turned and bolted, shouting orders down the corridor. He could hear the crew scrambling, boots on metal, curses flying, the clatter of tools against patched-up plating. They weren't soldiers, not really. Half of them were mechanics, smugglers, outcasts who'd signed on because they had nowhere else to go. The other half were dreamers, kids raised on stories of humanity's lost glory. He'd dragged them all into this, and now they were fighting for their lives. No regrets, not yet. A flash on the view screen snapped his focus back. The drones were closing, their weapons charging again. He cursed, wrenching the ship into a hard dive. The Defiant groaned, a deep, mournful sound, but it obeyed. Plasma streaked past, close enough to rattle the hull. "Too close." "Gunner," he shouted. The lanky kid was still at the cannon, sweat soaking his shirt. "Ready," came the shaky reply. "Take the one on the left, now." Another burst of light ripped from the barrel, wild and unrefined. It grazed the drone, shearing off a wing. The machine spun out, damaged but not dead, trailing smoke as it fell behind. One left. Before he could savor it, the sensors screamed. A new signature, massive, emerging from the edge of the system. His gut sank. The Zarthani cruiser. It loomed into view, a jagged silhouette of black and gold, its cannons glinting like teeth. The drones were just the hounds. This was the hunter. The comms crackled, that same alien voice now thick with triumph. "You've amused us long enough, human. Your little toy ends here." The captain's blood boiled. Toy? He'd poured everything into this ship, every ounce of rage, every memory of his father's broken hands, every night spent plotting revenge against a galaxy that thought humans were done. This wasn't a toy. It was a promise. "Full power to engines," he growled, slamming the throttle forward. The Defiant lurched, its frame shuddering as the last of its strength poured into a desperate sprint. The cruiser fired, a lance of energy that tore through space, missing by a hair as he twisted the ship aside. The crew screamed, thrown against their stations, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. "Head for the nebula," he ordered, pointing to a swirling cloud of gas and dust on the sensors. It was a long shot. Radiation would scramble their systems, maybe hide them, but it was all they had. His second-in-command burst back in, eyes wide. "The nebula, that'll cook us alive!" He didn't look at her. "Better than dying out here. Move!" She gritted her teeth and ran, relaying the plan. The ship barreled toward the cloud, the cruiser's next shot grazing the hull, blasting a chunk of plating into the void. Alarms wailed, red lights bathing the cockpit. The drone, still alive, fired too, a weaker hit that punched through the starboard side. He felt the impact in his chest, like the ship was part of him, bleeding with every blow. The nebula loomed closer, its edges glowing with an eerie violet haze. The cruiser slowed, wary of the chaos within, but the drone didn't. It followed, relentless, its targeting locked. "One shot left," the gunner rasped, hands trembling on the controls. "Make it count," the captain said, voice steady despite the chaos. The cannon fired, a final desperate roar. The drone vanished in a burst of flame, and then the Defiant plunged into the nebula, swallowed by the storm. Silence fell, broken only by the ship's dying groans. They were alive, for now. But the hunter was still out there, and it wouldn't stop. The Defiant drifted in the nebula's embrace, a ghost ship shrouded in violet mist. The engines had fallen silent, their roar replaced by a faint, ominous whine as the last of their power bled away. The captain stood motionless in the cockpit, his hand still on the controls, though there was nothing left to steer. The viewscreen was a mess of static, the nebula's radiation frying the sensors, painting the world outside in flickers of noise and shadow. Somewhere out there, the Zarthani cruiser waited. Patient, predatory, knowing its prey couldn't run forever. He could feel its presence like a weight on his chest, a promise of ruin. Inside, the ship was a graveyard of sound. Creaks and groans from the battered hull, the hiss of leaking pipes, the ragged breathing of a crew pushed past their limits. His second-in-command slumped against the wall, her face smeared with soot, one hand pressed to a cut above her eye. "We're blind," she said, voice hoarse. "Sensors are down, comms are scrambled. If they find us in here—" She didn't finish. She didn't need to. He knew what came next. Annihilation, swift and merciless. The Defiant had defied the odds too long, and the galaxy didn't forgive miracles. He turned from the controls, his boots heavy on the deck. "Then we don't let them find us. Get the crew to kill the power, everything. Lights, life support, all of it. We go dark." Her eyes widened, a spark of disbelief cutting through her exhaustion. "Dark? We'll freeze in an hour. Oxygen will run out in 2. He met her gaze, unyielding. "Better than a plasma round through the hull. Do it." She stared at him, then gave a sharp nod and pushed off the wall, disappearing into the flickering corridors. He heard her voice echo, barking orders, and one by one, the ship's systems died. The hum of the vents faded. The dim glow of panels winked out. Darkness swallowed them whole. The cold came fast, seeping through the walls, curling around his fingers as he stood watch. His breath fogged in the faint light of the emergency console, the only thing still alive, its glow barely enough to see by. The crew huddled in the shadows, their faces pale and drawn, eyes reflecting a mix of fear and stubborn fire. The gunner, still shaking from his last shot, clutched a wrench like it was a lifeline. A mechanic muttered curses under her breath, patching a sparking conduit with trembling hands. They were breaking, but they weren't broken. Not yet. He let his mind drift, just for a moment, back to the rogue yard where this all began. He'd stood among the skeletal frames of half-built ships, the air thick with welled smoke and defiance. The shipwrights, old hands like his father, young blood with nothing to lose, had poured their souls into the Defiant. They'd known the risks, known the Council would hunt them down. "We're not building a ship," one had said, voice rough with years of grit. "We're building a middle finger to the stars." He'd laughed then, a rare sound. Now that memory burned in his chest, a coal keeping him warm as the cold tightened its grip. A faint ping broke the silence, the emergency console. He leaned in, squinting at the grainy data, a shadow on the edge of the nebula, moving slow. The cruiser. It hadn't given up. It was probing, scanning, waiting for a blip of heat or power to betray them. His pulse quickened, but he forced it down. "Stay quiet," he whispered to the crew, voice low and steady. "They don't know we're here." They nodded, breath held, as if sound alone could doom them. Minutes stretched into eternity, the cold sinking deeper, numbing his hands, frosting the deck. Then a jolt. The ship rocked, a dull thud echoing through the hull. His second-in-command staggered back in, her face tight with panic. "Debris," she hissed. "Nebula's full of it. Rocks, old wrecks. We're drifting right into it." Another thud, sharper, and a crack split the air, a panel buckling somewhere below. The captain's jaw clenched. Hide from the cruiser and the nebula would tear them apart. Fight, and they'd be ash in seconds. No good choices, just human ones. He straightened, decision made. "Power up, minimum, engines only. We're not dying like rats in a trap." She stared at him, then grinned, a feral edge to it. "Aye, Captain." The crew moved, sluggish but alive, as the Defiant hummed back to life. The cruiser would see them now. Game on. But humans didn't go quiet. They went loud. The Defiant shuddered as its engines sputtered awake, a low growl cutting through the nebula's oppressive silence. The captain stood at the helm, his hands steady on the controls despite the ice in his veins. Not from the cold, but from the certainty of what came next. The emergency console flickered, its weak light casting jagged shadows across the cockpit. The crew moved like ghosts in the dark, their breaths visible in the frigid air, hands fumbling to coax life back into the dying ship. They knew the risk. Power meant detection. Detection meant the cruiser. And the cruiser meant death, or a fight they couldn't win. Yet. "Engines at 20%, his second-in-command rasped, her voice tight as she leaned over a cracked display. "Enough to maneuver, not much else. Hull's holding, barely." She glanced at him, her eyes sharp with a question she didn't ask. "What now?" He didn't answer with words. His fingers tightened on the throttle, easing the ship forward through the nebula's swirling haze. The deck vibrated beneath his boots, a fragile pulse of defiance against the void. Every second they stayed alive was a spit in the Council's face. A dull clang rang out, another chunk of debris glancing off the hull. The nebula was a minefield, littered with the bones of forgotten ships, and the Defiant was limping right through it. The captain adjusted course, weaving past a spinning shard of metal that glinted in the console's glow. The cruiser was out there, its sensors sweeping, and he could almost feel its alien commander, cold, calculating, savoring the hunt. The Zarthani didn't rush. They didn't need to. They'd crushed humanity's fleets before, turned proud armadas to dust under the Council's banner. One rogue ship? To them, it was a gnat buzzing too close to the flame. "Contact!" the gunner shouted, voice cracking as he pointed at the console. A blip, sharp, deliberate, moving through the static. The cruiser had found them. The captain's gut twisted, but his face stayed stone. "Distance?" he demanded. "Close, too close," his second-in-command answered, her fingers flying over the controls. "They're at the nebula's edge, locking weapons. We've got minutes." Minutes. Not enough to run, not enough to hide, just enough to fight. He turned to the crew, their faces pale but fierce in the dim light. "You all knew this might happen," he said, voice low but carrying. "We built this ship to prove something. To them, to ourselves. They think we're beaten. They think we'll roll over. But we're humans. We don't beg. We bite." A murmur rippled through them, a spark catching fire. The gunner gripped his station, knuckles white. A mechanic slammed a fist against the wall, nodding. His second-in-command met his gaze and smirked, a wild edge to it. "Let's bite hard," she said. "Full power to engines," he ordered. "Guns, too, whatever's left. We're not waiting for them to come to us." The ship groaned as energy surged through its veins, the hull trembling under the strain. The viewscreen cleared just enough to show the cruiser emerging from the nebula's rim, a monster of sleek curves and glowing ports, its cannons charging with a sickly yellow light. It dwarfed the Defiant, a god facing a mortal. But gods bled too if you hit them right. "Target their weapons array," he snapped at the gunner. "One shot, make it hurt." The kid nodded, sweat beading on his brow as he wrestled with the manual controls. The Defiant surged forward, no longer hiding, its engines roaring defiance. The cruiser fired first, a beam of energy that sliced through the nebula, clipping the ship's flank. The deck bucked, throwing the crew to their knees, sparks raining from a busted panel. "Hold it together!" the captain roared, righting the ship with a brutal yank of the controls. The gunner fired back, a single ragged blast from the Defiant's cannon. It streaked through the haze, wild and unguided, but it hit. The cruiser's weapons array erupted in a bloom of fire, one cannon going dark. A cheer erupted, hoarse and triumphant, but it died fast. The cruiser retaliated, a volley of smaller shots peppering the Defiant's hull. Metal screamed, air hissed from new breaches, and the captain felt the ship falter beneath him. They'd drawn blood, but they were bleeding worse. "Keep moving," he shouted, pushing the engines past their limit. The cruiser loomed closer, its remaining guns tracking them. The nebula wouldn't save them now. This was it. The line between survival and oblivion, and he'd be damned if he crossed it quietly. The Defiant was dying. The captain knew it in his bones, felt it in the way the ship trembled beneath him, its hull splintering like brittle glass. The cockpit was a chaos of smoke and flashing red, alarms blaring, panels sparking, the air thick with the stench of burnt wiring. The viewscreen flickered, showing the Tsar Thani cruiser bearing down, its remaining cannons glowing hot despite the wound they'd carved into its flank. The Defiant had struck first blood, but the beast wasn't slowing. It was angry now, and that made it deadlier. "Engines at 10%, his second-in-command shouted, her voice raw over the screech of tearing metal. She clung to a console, one arm braced against the wall as the ship rocked from another hit. "We've lost starboard thrusters, maneuvering's shot, hull breaches on every deck." Her eyes locked with his, wild and searching. "We can't take another volley." He didn't answer, not with words. His hands stayed on the controls, wrestling the ship into a shaky turn, buying seconds they didn't have. The crew scrambled behind him, patching leaks, rerouting power, fighting to keep the Defiant alive. They were out of miracles, but they weren't out of fight. A plasma bolt slammed into the rear, the impact throwing him forward against the console. Pain flared in his chest, but he gritted his teeth and held on. The gunner sprawled across his station, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead, but he dragged himself back up, cursing. "Cannon's dead, no power left," he yelled. The captain's jaw tightened. No guns, no speed, no shields, just a battered shell and a crew that wouldn't quit. The cruiser loomed closer, filling the view screen, its silhouette a promise of extinction. The comms crackled, that alien voice cutting through the noise, smooth, mocking, venomous. You fought well, human, for a dead species. Surrender now and we'll grant you a quick end. Resist, and we'll peel your little ship apart piece by piece. The captain's lip curled, a snarl born of years of rage. Surrender. He'd watched his father waste away under the council's boot, seen colonies starve while Zarthani fleets patrolled the skies. Surrender wasn't in his blood. It wasn't in any of theirs. "Shut it off," he growled, and his second-in-command killed the comms with a flick of her hand. Silence fell, heavy and defiant. He turned to the crew, their faces gaunt but burning with the same fire he felt. "They think we're done," he said, voice steady despite the chaos. "They think we'll beg. But this ship, this fight, it's not about winning. It's about showing them we're still here. We're still human." Ideas? He wasn't asking for hope. He was asking for teeth. The mechanic piped up, her voice rough but fierce. "Ram them." A beat of stunned silence. Then the gunner laughed, a short, jagged sound. "She's serious. Take out their bridge, maybe cripple them." His second-in-command stepped closer, her expression grim but alive. "Engines might hold for one last burn, straight shot. They won't expect it. Too crazy, even for us." The captain's eyes narrowed, mind racing. Ramming a cruiser 10 times their size? Suicide. But suicide with a purpose, a final bloody mark on the galaxy's face. He nodded once, sharp. "Do it. Full power, whatever's left. Aim for their command deck." The crew didn't hesitate. They moved, frantic, focused, alive, as the Defiant's engines coughed and roared one last time. The ship lurched forward, picking up speed, a wounded animal charging its hunter. The cruiser fired again, a glancing blow that ripped through the port side, but it didn't stop them. The captain gripped the controls, steering through the pain, the smoke, the screams of the hull giving way. On the view screen, the cruiser grew massive, its bridge a gleaming target. The Zarthani must have realized too late. Their shots went wild, panicked. The captain's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile. His father's voice echoed in his skull. "We don't bend. We break 'em. This was breaking them, all right? Breaking everything." The crew braced, some shouting, some silent, all in it together. The Defiant closed the gap, a spear aimed at the heart of the enemy. Impact in 10 seconds. 9, 8. Then, a flash. Not from the cruiser, but from the side. A new signature on the dying sensors. Human. Another ship. Small, fast, armed. A voice burst through the static, rough and urgent. "Hold off, you crazy bastards! We've got your back!" The captain froze, disbelief warring with the fire in his gut. They weren't alone. The Defiant hung on the edge of oblivion, its hull a mangled wreck, engines howling as they burned through their last reserves. The captain's hands locked on the controls, his breath ragged, every muscle coiled for the collision that would end it all. The Zarthani cruiser filled the view screen, its bridge a gleaming bullseye, seconds away from impact. The crew braced, some cursing, some praying, all ready to carve their defiance into the enemy's flesh. Then that voice had crackled through the static, rough and human. "Hold off, you crazy bastards! We've got your back!" A new ship, small, jagged, unmistakably human, streaked into view, guns blazing. The captain yanked the controls hard, aborting the ram at the last second. The Defiant veered, shuddering as it scraped past the cruiser's hull, metal screeching against metal. Sparks flew, the ship bucking wildly, but it held, just barely. The newcomer fired a salvo, crude but fierce, slamming into the cruiser's side. Explosions bloomed, tearing through its armor, and the massive ship faltered, its cannons falling silent for a heartbeat. The captain's chest heaved, disbelief warring with a surge of raw, feral hope. They weren't alone. Humanity hadn't folded. "Identify!" his second-in-command shouted, staggering to the comms console, her voice sharp over the chaos. The reply came fast, laced with grit and pride. "Renegade, out of Tau Ceti. Heard you were stirring trouble. Couldn't let you hog the fun." Another burst of fire lit the void as the Renegade danced around the cruiser, a scrappy fighter punching above its weight. The captain's lips twitched. A grin, hard and wild. Tau Ceti. The rumors had been true. More rogue yards, more ships, more humans who'd said to hell with the ban. The Defiant wasn't a lone spark. It was a fuse. "Engines?" he demanded, turning to his second-in-command. She checked the readings, wincing. 5%. We're coasting on fumes." He nodded, eyes back on the view screen. The cruiser was recovering, its remaining guns swiveling toward the Renegade. The little ship was fast, but it wouldn't last long against that beast. The Defiant was a wreck, its guns dead, its hull leaking air, but it still had mass. It still had teeth. "One more run," he said, voice low and final. "We hit their engines. Give the Renegade a chance." The crew didn't argue. They knew what it meant. Knew this was the end game. The mechanic tightened a strap on her harness, muttering, "Let's make it loud." The gunner, blood streaking his face, gave a shaky thumbs up. His second-in-command met his gaze, steady despite the exhaustion carving lines into her face. "Full burn?" she asked. He nodded. "Full burn." She slammed the controls, and the Defiant lurched forward, its dying engines screaming one last time. The ship gained speed, a broken arrow aimed at the cruiser's glowing thrusters. The Tsar Thani saw it coming. Plasma bolts streaked toward them, one punching through the cockpit's edge, shattering the view screen. Glass and air exploded outward, sucking at the crew, but they held on, strapped in, roaring defiance. The captain kept his hands on the helm, steering blind, feeling the ship's pulse through the deck. The Renegade fired again, drawing the cruiser's attention, buying them seconds. It was enough. Impact. The Defiant slammed into the cruiser's engines, a thunderous crash that shook the stars. Metal crumpled, fire erupted, and the massive ship's thrusters went dark, its bulk spinning helplessly in the void. The Defiant bounced off, a wreck of twisted steel, tumbling through space. Inside, silence fell. Alarms dead, systems gone, only the sound of ragged breathing. The captain slumped in his chair, vision blurring, but alive. They all were, somehow. The comms flickered, the Renegade's voice cutting through. "You insane sons of bitches, you did it! Cruiser's crippled! We're coming for you!" The captain exhaled, a rough laugh breaking free. His father's words echoed. "We don't bend. We break 'em." They'd broken them, all right. Not just the cruiser, but the lie. That humans were finished. That the ban had won. Outside, the nebula glowed, the Renegade closing in to pull survivors from the wreckage. The captain looked at his crew, battered, bleeding, unbroken, and saw the truth. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The galaxy would hear about the Defiant, about the humans who'd built a warship in the dark and fought with it in the light. More would come. More ships, more fire, more defiance. The Council thought they'd chained humanity. They'd just lit the match,